thank you for your love and devotion to our family and to the family of nations you have served so diligently all these years. May flights of angels sing thee to thy rest.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong. But I shall not have strength to carry out this resolution alone unless you join in it with me, as I now invite you to do. I know that your support will be unfailingly given. God help me to make good my vow, and God bless all of you who are willing to share in it.
That wish has never deserted me through a half-century, during which you have seen turmoil and tragedy.
On the 8th of September 2022, Buckingham Palace announced that the Queen was under medical supervision. In a year that had seen the Queen celebrate her Platinum Jubilee, and where the nation had celebrated her unprecedented success as a monarch, it was news that did not sit well with the nation. Princess Anne and Prince Charles, already in Scotland, went immediately to be at their mother's side. Other members of the family began making their way to Balmoral. The public, hoping for the best, wished Her Majesty a swift recovery, perhaps hoping to avoid the news the whole country couldn't face.
Just after 12:30 today, we heard the news from Buckingham Palace that the Queen were concerned about the Queen's health. They said that doctors were concerned and they told her to rest, and she was under medical supervision. But the concerning thing is that members of the royal family, her children, and William, the second in line to the throne, grandchild, are all travelling up to Balmoral to see her as we speak. So that is the concerning thing, that the family feel that things are so serious that they need to be by the Queen's side at this moment.
Intense speculation circled the headlines and travelled the globe, perhaps an indication of the news that would soon be announced. At 2:39 p.m, Royal Air Force flight KRF-23R took off from RAF Northolt in West London. In the aeroplane, Prince William, the Duke of York, and the Earl and Countess of Wessex. There was a sense of urgency, a sense something was wrong. All other events and engagements were dropped. The plane landed at Aberdeen Airport, and the family quickly travelled to Balmoral Castle. A news alert informed the public Harry would be travelling up to Balmoral separately, and Meghan would not accompany him. At long last, after hours of broadcasting and speculation in the news, the Prime Minister received the news. At 4:30 p.m, Cabinet Secretary Simon Case informed Liz Truss that London Bridge is down. Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, is dead. Prime Minister Liz Truss had only met the Queen days before, when Her Majesty had asked her to form a government on her behalf. They were pictured together in what would be the Queen's final official photographs. Liz Truss and her aides hurriedly prepared to write a statement to present later that evening. News reporters reached for their black ties, alarms flashed in radio stations, and the media was informed of her passing. It was their responsibility to share the news, perhaps the biggest news story they would share in their lifetime. At 6:30 p.m, Buckingham Palace announces the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Queen Elizabeth II, the longest reigning monarch in British history.
So let me just now repeat that statement from the royal household, which we have received in the last few minutes. It reads, "The Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow."
There is no pause in the continuity of the monarchy, made clear by the statement from the palace. The Queen is dead, long live the King. Flags were lowered to half-mast. People began congregating outside palace gates. Flowers, cards, and most touchingly, Paddington bears in arms. More moving than any statement could be, a marmalade sandwich or two was left outside the palace for later. A further statement was issued by the palace from His Majesty the King. "We mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother." Liz Truss made her statement, one each of her predecessors had prepared for, but she could not have anticipated she would be the one to share the news so early in her premiership.
Queen Elizabeth II was the rock on which modern Britain was built. Our country has grown and flourished under her reign. She was the very spirit of Great Britain, and that spirit will endure. She has been our longest ever reigning monarch. It's an extraordinary achievement to have presided with such dignity and grace for 70 years. And with the passing of the second Elizabethan age, we usher in a new era in the magnificent history of our great country, exactly as Her Majesty would have wished, by saying the words, "God save the King."
The new King and Queen, Charles and Camilla, left Balmoral on Friday the 9th of September. One of his first duties, to meet with his new Prime Minister, Liz Truss. For the newly elected Prime Minister to serve two monarchs in her first week of service must have been a challenging introduction to the job. Flags across royal and governmental buildings flew at half-mast. Westminster Abbey, St. Paul's Cathedral and Windsor Castle began to toll their bells. Gun salutes were fired for each and every year of the Queen's life in Hyde Park and other stations. The King's most significant duty that day, to address his people. In his first televised address, he paid tribute to his mother and pledged his duty to service. Impeccably written and delivered, Charles showed for the first time the stoic and compassionate monarch he would be.
She made sacrifices for duty. Her dedication and devotion as sovereign never wavered. Through times of change and progress, through times of joy and celebration, and through times of sadness and loss.
His speech to the nation last night was obviously incredibly moving, but I thought also incredibly well judged and thoughtful. What he said about his mother really said all that needed to be said about her extraordinary record and the service and duty.
In her life of service, we saw that abiding love of tradition, together with that fearless embrace of progress, which makes us great as nations. The affection, admiration, and respect she inspired became the hallmark of her reign.
Charles has great delivery. I mean, he's practically like a Shakespearean actor. Well, he was a Shakespearean actor at one time. So his delivery of all these speeches is completely brilliant. And I think he writes most of them himself. And he delivers it with superb timing and superb emotion.
Queen Elizabeth was a life well lived, a promise with destiny kept, and she is mourned most deeply in her passing. That promise of lifelong service I renew to you all today. Alongside the personal grief that all my family are feeling, we also share with so many of you in the United Kingdom, in all the countries where the Queen was head of state, in the Commonwealth and across the world, a deep sense of gratitude for the more than 70 years in which my mother, as Queen, served the people of so many nations. In 1947, on her 21st birthday, she pledged in a broadcast from Cape Town to the Commonwealth to devote her life, whether it be short or long, to the service of her peoples. I pay tribute to my mother's memory, and I honor her life of service.
Outside the royal court, the state trumpets sound. Before rolling news, the role of this part of the ceremony was to spread the word to a waiting nation.
The Prince Charles Philip Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become our only lawful and rightful liege lord, Charles III. God save the King!
One of the most significant days for any monarch is when they are proclaimed king or queen. At St. James's Palace, the Accession Council met. A moment in history captured as all the late Queen's former and current living prime ministers gathered, watching this historic moment.
My mother's reign was unequaled in its duration, its dedication, and its devotion. Even as we grieve, we give thanks for this most faithful life.
This event has happened in one form or another since Anglo-Saxon times, so you felt you were part of an extraordinary historical event. The overwhelming feeling, I think, was one of continuity. We mourn Queen Elizabeth II for her extraordinary reign and all her amazing talents, but seamlessly you go straight to the new king, to Charles III, being sworn in that very public but very old-fashioned and historical way, and that overwhelming sense of the continuity of our constitutional monarchy and democracy, which we should be very proud of.
Hooray! Hooray! Hooray!
The very first Privy Council was held by Charles, along with Privy Councillors, Camilla and William. The King made his personal declaration and solemnly swore an oath to the Protestant faith and to Parliament. Union flags were returned to full mast from 1 p.m. and would remain so for 24 hours to celebrate the new King, following which they would return to half-mast in continued mourning of the late Queen. The new Prince and Princess of Wales, accompanied by Harry and Meghan, Duke and Duchess of Sussex, reunited to read tributes left at Windsor Castle, a much-needed sign of unity when the monarchy faced a knock in its stability.
William and Kate, Harry and Meghan, in the same place at the same time. Given how bad their rift had become, many wondered if they'd ever be able to meet together in private, let alone like this. This week, however, they are sharing the common pain of losing the grandmother they loved. It was, according to a royal source tonight, Prince William who asked his brother if he and Meghan would join them here. And both sides clearly agreed that their family, perhaps also the nation right now, needed to see this.
Sunday the 11th of September marked the day the coffin was taken by road to the Palace of Holyrood House. In Operation London Bridge, the Queen wished for the Princess Royal to accompany the coffin on its journey. Operation Unicorn was in place for the event she would pass away in Scotland. Balmoral was known to be one of the Queen's favourite residences. From a young child, she enjoyed holidaying in the Highlands. She enjoyed visits to the local shops, and being a member of the church, she became an important member of the community. As the hearse left the gates of the castle, the streets were lined with the people who'd come to know her as one of their own. They watched, in blessed memory, a pillar of strength and continuity, not just to the country, but to their community. In Holyrood House, the coffin was placed in the throne room, where staff could pay their respects to the late Queen. Proclamations were read in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
The Queen was respected around the world. She had given a lifetime of service, and her devotion to duty was an example and inspiration for us all. And as Prime Minister, of course, I was fortunate enough to be able to meet her in different circumstances, including in the weekly audiences, but also at Balmoral, and saw a more relaxed Queen. I think we are all mourning the fact that somebody who was a constant in our lives has now passed away. And we must always remember that she wasn't just our Queen. She was a mother and a grandmother and a great-grandmother, and my thoughts and prayers are with the whole of the royal family.
Back in London, the King and Queen visited Westminster Hall. The Houses of Parliament expressed their condolences. The new King made his first address to Parliament.
Before the King flew to Scotland this morning, both Houses of Parliament had gathered in Westminster Hall to present their addresses of condolence and loyalty to the new monarch. Much of the ceremony and procedure that's followed the death of the Queen is ancient, albeit unseen for 7 decades. This one is new. In the past, such addresses would have been presented in private.
Members of both Houses of Parliament gather here to express our deep sympathy for the loss we have all sustained in the death of our Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth. We have seen that this is a loss that is felt around the world. Deep as our grief is, we know yours is deeper.
I think part of her great service that was unseen was that, as one former Prime Minister I heard saying at one point in a conversation, that there was only one person in the world that he could talk to and say exactly what he thought and felt, and was 100% certain that it would never go any further. And that was Her Majesty.
If I asked her for her view on an issue, she would give it carefully, but she would give it. And if I asked her about things that were to do with where the British people might be, or what she thought was the state of British opinion, you know, she had a very shrewd sense of where the centre of gravity was.
Oh, well, any Prime Minister who didn't listen to the Queen's views was a very foolish man or woman indeed, because she had an historic memory, longer than any civil service advisor. She had a great understanding of how people lived, and was very interested in what government policy meant for the lives of people in different parts of the country. That was something about which she was concerned and about which she would ask questions. So you got a very clear idea from an intelligent, well-informed person about how some of the policies might be received and what their implications might be. And that, to politicians who can often be locked in the narrow world of Westminster, is easy. It's very easy to find yourself blocked off from opinion that once you would have been familiar with. And the Queen was one outlet where sometimes something was said that brought you back to realise exactly what something may mean. And I don't think there is a single Prime Minister who has worked with her who wouldn't say the same thing.
Visits by American presidents have been memorable landmarks in my reign. Unlike in the United States, the British head of state is not limited to 2 terms of 4 years. And I have welcomed no fewer than 7 of your predecessors.
In the very hall where an earlier Parliament had put an earlier King Charles on trial for his life, the King spoke of the inextricable link between Crown and Parliament in a constitutional monarchy.
Parliament is the living and breathing instrument of our democracy. That your traditions are ancient, we see in the construction of this great hall. While very young, Her late Majesty pledged herself to serve her country and her people, and to maintain the precious principles of constitutional government which lie at the heart of our nation. This vow she kept with unsurpassed devotion. She set an example of selfless duty, which, with God's help and your counsels, I am resolved faithfully to follow.
In this very hall on Wednesday, the Queen's coffin will be brought to lie in state for the 4 days leading up to her funeral. It will be a chance for hundreds of thousands to file past and pay their respects.
King Charles and Queen Camilla quickly flew back to Scotland, where they attended the ceremony of the keys. This traditional ceremony takes place once a year. When the monarch arrives, they meet with the Lord Provost, who presents them with the keys of the city of Edinburgh. The monarch traditionally returns them, entrusting the city with the elected officials. The king then carried out an inspection of the guard. King Charles led the family in procession as the Queen's coffin travelled to St. Giles Cathedral for a service of thanksgiving. For 24 hours, the public were able to file through and pay their respects. The King went on to hold an audience with the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon.
This is a moment of acute loss and profound sadness. It is also a moment of enormous significance. The passing of Queen Elizabeth marks the end of an era. Our nation is in mourning. My heart and my thoughts, and I know those of people across Scotland, are with the royal family at this deeply sad moment.
A vigil of the princes was held at the cathedral later that night. For the first time, this included a princess. Princess Anne joined in the vigil alongside her brothers to honour their mother. Queen Elizabeth makes her final journey. In an RAF aircraft, accompanied by the Princess Royal, her coffin was flown to London.
I think for me, the most important thing about Queen Elizabeth II was the simple fact that she was a believer. You go back through Christian history and the history of the monarchy in this country, and a few of them have been a bit dodgy, shall we say. But this was a woman of such evident deep faith. And her Christmas messages bring that out. She knew her faith, she knew her Bible. She was a huge fan of the parable of the Good Samaritan, for instance. I think she leaves a huge legacy of faith. I think it's so important for the monarch not just to be someone who is a symbol of unity to our nation, but also, from my point of view particularly, it's good as well that they are a believing Christian, and that therefore is a symbol to other people of the importance of Christian faith in the life of the nation.
The period of national mourning and reflection that we go into is important for two reasons. First, as a mark of respect for a truly exceptional life, and of course for the royal family, but also as a moment of true reflection on what Her Majesty the Queen taught us, what she gave us. Because as we go forward from here, it will be important to understand that. In a world that is ever-changing and very volatile, she provided constancy and consistency for the British people. And those are qualities that we all need to learn to value more. She defined the national character in most of the last century and in this, what it is to be British. That mix of stoicism and a sense of humour, a great basis on which anybody can face the ups and downs of life, but also stern and serious, yet warm and generous at the same time. That's Queen Elizabeth II, as I remember her.
Hundreds of people lined the street as a motorcade accompanied by the coffin, draped in the royal standard, made its way to Buckingham Palace for the very last time. The hearse was illuminated. Well-wishers watching the drive-by could clearly see inside the hearse, a small detail of Operation London Bridge, which was revealed to have been an intentional design by the Queen. In her life and in her death, as she had said herself, she must be seen to be believed.
You're clearly very, very sad. Tell me how you're feeling right now at this news.
Just touched with the whole situation, you know. You don't think you will be, but she's been part of my life forever. And, you know, she's not here. She's gone. And, you know, you hope, but you appreciate that, you know. Her age, it was expected at some point, but even when it happens, it's still a shock. And that's what I'm feeling now. Just got that feeling the way I feel.
Despite steady rain, thousands lined the A40 into central London from the west. On the other side of the road, they stopped, nose to tail, in the fast lane, as the cortege came past. As they passed Marble Arch, the pavements on the western end of Oxford Street and down Park Lane were packed and silent. Rounding the Victoria Memorial in front of Buckingham Palace, the crowd was dotted with hundreds of tiny lights as people lit her way home with the torches on their phones. A police motorcycle escort, their job done, stopped, heads bowed on either side. Inside the palace, her family were waiting to receive her. Children and grandchildren gathered for a last private evening before her coffin is taken in procession back into public view for the lying in state in Westminster Hall tomorrow afternoon.
The coffin remained in the bowroom overnight, where once again staff were able to pay their respects to their former queen. King Charles continued his four-nation tour, travelling to Northern Ireland with his wife and Queen Camilla. They visited Hillsborough Castle to view a special exhibition about the Queen's association with the area. After meeting with Northern Ireland Secretary Chris Heaton Harries, they attended a service of prayer at St Anne's Cathedral before heading back to London. That evening, a rehearsal of the procession from Buckingham Palace to the Palace of Westminster took place to ensure the immaculate standard of pomp and ceremony would be met.
You'll be a wonderful king. You'll be a
On Wednesday the 14th of September, the King led the procession behind the gun carriage which held the late Queen's coffin. He was accompanied by members of the royal family and senior staff of the late Queen's household. Atop the coffin laid the imperial state crown. In immaculate military style, the procession led the coffin to Westminster Hall.
For most of her life, first as a princess, then as queen, Buckingham Palace was her London home. Today, with military precision, Britain's longest-serving monarch left the palace for the last time. The Queen's coffin, draped in the royal standard and with the imperial state crown on top, was taken slowly through the palace gates aboard a gun carriage. Behind walked the King, his sister and brothers, and behind them the Dukes of Cambridge and Sussex. 25 years ago, the two brothers had their childhood defined by the image of them walking behind their mother's coffin. Today, they honoured their grandmother in the same way.
There was an extraordinary outpouring of grief amongst the nation because, you know, the majority of the Queen's subjects have never known another monarch. And it was kind of the end of an era. It wasn't just her death, it was the end of an era. It was end of the Elizabethan age as we know it. And of course it was all so dramatic and so beautifully staged that made it even more poignant. The soldiers, the wonderful music, the people that used to work for the Queen walking behind her coffin was very, very moving. And the crowd, we know, was crying. Or they were crying, or they were cheering, or they were just silent, completely silent.
Operation Marquis was put into action, codename for the Queen lying in state following the ceremonial procession. In a similar way to the Queen Mother, Queen Elizabeth's lying in state allowed the people to file past the coffin to pay their respects. The process of managing this, codenamed Operation Feather. In an unprecedented turn of events, the sheer number of people who wished to pay their respects resulted in a queue unlike any in recent history. People waited in line for several hours in the cold and rain just to have a few precious moments to say goodbye to their Queen.
The queue for lying in state at Westminster Hall became a story in itself because the people were queuing for 10 hours, 13 hours, even longer. And it was cold. And the queue was almost the story more than the actual lying in state.
Thousands of dawns have broken over Westminster, but very few have broken on a day quite like this. Here to witness it, hundreds of people willing to sit through the rainy night to pay their last respects to the Queen.
But I haven't had any sleep.
the adrenaline kicks in, I think.
Patricia spent the whole night in the queue. She was saved from sleeping on the wet pavement by a local resident.
He was really kind, our guardian angel, because it fell down with rain.
She's described you as a guardian angel.
Not at all. The guardian angel of the country is over there.
By mid-morning, those who braved the night were being joined by others hoping not to queue for so long, from the elderly to the very young, each with their own reasons to come.
This is the only monarch I've known for the whole 10 years of my life.
Because this is history, so I just want to kind of just try and be a part of it.
People keep coming in their hundreds of thousands to honour two British traditions, the Queen and the queue.
Everyone was so friendly and so of one mind. There was a wonderful feeling of unity. And people that did queue for sort of 13 hours and things said actually the queuing was part of the whole experience.
The following few days were quieter, the focus on allowing the people to say goodbye to their queen. The queue continued to grow, and preparations for the funeral took place. Rehearsals of the funeral procession began to take place, and tributes continued to be made from all over the world.
This was a leader who truly led by example. And the best way we can honour her life is to understand how she worked, what that gave to the country, and commit to carry on in the same vein.
I think everybody throughout the country respects what the Queen has achieved. No monarch has lived longer. No monarch has had such a force of personality that is esteemed and respected across the whole world. And it's the whole world that is in mourning because she was a compassionate, dedicated, wonderful public servant, and nobody will ever forget the contribution she's made to our country and to our constitution, and indeed her contribution to the world. She was a peacemaker. She brought people together. She listened to people. She never told you what her view was on any partisan issue. She wanted people to come together, and she did bring people together. And the great achievement of her reign as the longest serving monarch is the utter respect, the overwhelming respect that every leader in every part of the world I know felt for her and is mourning her this evening.
And so it was. Moments like these, years in the planning, still unfolding 8 days on from the Queen's death. The streets around Llandaff Cathedral in Cardiff were packed, 64 years on from his first visit to Wales, in an era when they still used to sing, "God bless the Prince of Wales." The King and Queen Consort listened, the Prime Minister nearby, as the Archbishop of Wales paid tribute to the late Queen. He talked of her ability to influence through soft power.
Prime Ministers found that she was a trusted confidant. Her attention to matters of government, her knowledge of world events, and the longevity of her reign gave her an unmatched perspective and ability to see the distant scene.
On Friday the 16th of September, King Charles visited Wales, where he addressed the Senedd in Welsh.
Oedd bod yn dywysog Cymru mor hir. Yn awr, bydd fy mab William yn derbyn y teitl. Mae ganddo ef gariad dyfn at Gymru. That ancient title, dating from the time of those great Welsh rulers, like Llywelyn ap Griffith, whose memory is still rightly honoured, I now pass to my son William, whose love for this corner of the earth is made all the greater by the years he himself has spent here.
Earlier that day, the King and Queen attended a remembrance service at Llandaff Cathedral in Cardiff, after which they meted and greeted well-wishers. This was the final trip of the Home Nations tour, after which the King and Queen returned to London. The second Vigil of the Princes was held in Westminster Hall. The Queen's 4 children in military dress stood solemnly in silence to honour the former Queen, their late mother. On Saturday the 17th of September, state officials began to arrive, many of which went to Westminster Hall to pay their respects.
We've had an opportunity to meet with an awful lot of consequential people. But I can say that the ones who stand out in your mind are those whose relationship and interaction with you are consistent with their reputation. When the Queen had us to the castle for tea and we were joking crimpets, she kept offering me more. I kept eating everything she put in front of me. But she was the same in person as her image. Decent, honorable, and all about service. And our hearts go out to the royal family, to King Charles and all the family. It's a loss that leaves a giant hole. And sometimes you think you'll never overcome it. But as I've told the King, she's going to be with him every step of the way, every minute, every moment. And that's a reassuring notion.
The queue only continued to grow in length, and the spirits of the people stayed strong. Such an important and historic moment. People travelled from all corners of the globe to bid Her Majesty goodbye.
It's just a table of snacks and sugar to keep you going.
Her Majesty served us for 70 years. So it's the least I could do. So I've not bothered at all about how long it took. Not bothered at all to say goodbye to Her Majesty. Very solemn. I think, Her Majesty, I had the pleasure of meeting her twice and speaking to her, so I have that privilege. And she was a woman of duty, a woman of substance, and a woman that would like things to be done the right way. I managed to hold it together right until the end. When I left Westminster Hall, I got a bit emotional, shall we say. And it is just, it's very special for me. I mean, I've been in the Navy a long time, nearly 45 years. So I served Her Majesty for 44 years, 9 months and 4 days. And now I serve King Charles III. And I'm very proud to do that.
A third vigil was held, but this time by the late Queen's grandchildren. A first for royal vigils, and a moving moment for the grandchildren and the public lucky enough to be in the hall as the Prince's vigil took place. On the eve of the state funeral, the King, not short of duties to attend to, met with Prime Minister Liz Truss and then Prime Ministers of the Commonwealth realms. He later hosted a reception at Buckingham Palace for the heads of state. After thousands of people filed through the queue, a statement was released announcing the closing of the queue. The public began to ready themselves for what lay ahead, setting up their chairs and wrapping up in blankets, attempting to find the best vantage point for one of the most significant moments in modern history. At 8 p.m., the streets drew quiet, a minute's silence to reflect on the life of the late Queen. On Monday, the 19th of September, the nation would say goodbye. In ceremonial splendor, the late Queen's coffin traveled from Westminster Hall to Westminster Abbey. Over 2,000 people filled the Abbey, from world leaders to politicians to foreign royals.
As this day draws to its close, I know that my abiding memory of it will be not only the solemnity and beauty of the ceremony, but the inspiration of your loyalty and affection. I thank you all from a full heart. God bless you all.
Westminster Abbey was a place held dear to the late Queen, at which so many of the most important memories of her life had played out. It was where she took her coronation oath, and where she made her wedding vows, and now where her coffin would lay as her people said goodbye.
We will come together as a nation, as a Commonwealth, and indeed a global community, to lay my beloved mother to rest. In our sorrow, let us remember and draw strength from the light of her example.
A touching service watched by millions around the globe, with pomp and pageantry, with ceremony and tradition. Following the service, the historically unparalleled military procession escorted her coffin to Wellington Arch. From there, the late Queen made her final journey to Windsor. Crowds lined the route, and flowers were thrown in grief. In an intimate service at St. George's Chapel, the family and staff bid her a final goodbye.
Everyone was together, and everyone had one aim, and that was to say goodbye to the Queen, who in many cases was a close friend. And it sort of really drove it home that there was this wonderful, humble woman who was no longer there.
In the George VI Memorial Chapel, beside her late husband and strength and stay, Prince Philip, Queen Elizabeth II was laid to rest. With her mother, father, and sister too, us four were finally reunited. Her duty fulfilled, she rests in peace. The end of the second great Elizabethan age.
On behalf of all my family, I can only offer the most sincere and heartfelt thanks for your condolences and support. They mean more to me than I can ever possibly express. And to my darling Mama, as you begin your last great journey to join my dear late Papa, I want simply to say this: thank you.